Elia's ward learned very quickly that the silence inside the Aurelian sanctum was not empty. It pressed against him, soft, expectant, layered with a tension that had weight. Not the sharp hostility of a battlefield or the bored indifference of bureaucratic halls, but something older, observing, measuring, listening without sound. He stood exactly where protocol demanded, 3 steps behind the Terran ambassador, hands visible, posture neutral, breathing slow enough not to draw notice. The kind of stillness that came from years of military training and longer years of learning how not to be seen when being seen was dangerous. Around him, the Aurelian court unfolded in deliberate elegance. The chamber was circular, carved from pale stone that seemed to drink light rather than reflect it. Veins of faint luminescence ran through the floor like frozen currents, pulsing in time with something Elias couldn't hear but felt faintly behind his eyes. The ceiling arched impossibly high, open to a false sky where stars drifted in slow, ceremonial patterns. The Aurelians themselves were tall, willowy, near-human in form. Another case of convergent evolution, the briefing had said. Same limbs, same posture, same facial structure, but the eyes gave them away. Too reflective, too layered, as if emotion wasn't something they expressed but something they perceived. And then there were the ears. Long, elegant, swept back along their skulls, constantly moving. Not randomly, never randomly, but in subtle, synchronized shifts that Elias' implant struggled to categorize. Emotionally active species, the analyst had said. Extreme empathic sensitivity, broadcast-based social structure. Humans, by contrast, had been classified as emotionally inert, not emotionless, just unreadable. Elias had laughed at that in the briefing room. Standing here now, surrounded by dozens of Aurelians whose ears angled away from the human delegation as if from static interference, the laughter felt premature. At the center of the chamber, elevated on a crescent dais, stood High Regent Violia Thane. She was not yet queen, though everyone here knew she would be. The current monarch was absent, sequestered in ritual seclusion. Violia ruled in her stead, her presence radiating authority sharpened by restraint. Her robes shifted like liquid starlight, responding subtly to her breath. Her ears were longer than most, adorned with thin bands of crystalline metal that chimed faintly when she moved. She was watching the human delegation with professional neutrality, except her eyes. They kept flicking, not to the ambassador, but to Elias. He noticed because he was trained to notice things he wasn't supposed to be noticing. The Terran ambassador finished delivering the formal greeting. His voice translated into melodic Aurelian harmonics by the hovering linguistic prism between them. We seek continued cooperation, the ambassador concluded, based on mutual respect and shared stability. Violia inclined her head. The Aurelian conquered acknowledges your presence, she replied. Her voice resonated in layered tones, as if several notes occupied the same word. We will consider your proposal. Diplomatic ambiguity at its finest. The ritual continued. Symbolic gestures. Blessings spoken for abstract concepts Elias barely understood, corridors of trust, continuity of intention, harmony between non-identical minds. Elias' feet began to ache. He shifted his weight by a millimeter. The floor whispered, not a sound exactly, more like a pressure change, but every Aurelian ear in the chamber flicked toward him in perfect unison. Elias froze. The silence deepened. Violia's gaze sharpened, not hostile, not alarmed, but focused, curious. Her eyes locked on his, and something inside Elias, something quiet he had never named, shifted in response. Not fear, not excitement, just awareness. The Regent's ears tilted forward a fraction. That, Elias would later learn, was the first sign that something had gone wrong, or very, very right. The Aurelian sanctum had a way of making stillness feel loud. Elias felt it most acutely in the pause after his accidental movement, the kind of pause that didn't belong to silence, but to attention. The entire chamber seemed to lean inward, not physically, but perceptually, as if dozens of minds had turned their focus into a single beam and pointed it at him. He did not move, not because he was afraid, though fear was present, humming politely in the background, but because experience had taught him that reacting too quickly around unfamiliar power structures was how misunderstandings became funerals. High Regent Virlia Thane did not break eye contact. That alone was unusual. Aurelians avoided sustained visual fixation unless engaged in deliberate empathic exchange. Direct eye contact was considered invasive, intimate, or confrontational depending on context. Elia's briefing implant flashed a warning in the corner of his vision. Sustained ocular focus detected. Probability of empathic probing. High. He ignored it. If she was reading him, panic would only amplify whatever signal he was projecting. So he did what he had learned to do in 100 dangerous situations across a dozen worlds. He quieted himself, he slowed his breathing, let his thoughts settle, let the noise inside his head sink beneath the surface like sediment in still water. Virlia's ears shifted again, not back, not away, forward. A murmur rippled through the Aurelian nobles. Elias didn't need translation to recognize the tone, confusion layered with restrained alarm. One of the senior empath attendants stepped closer to the dais, their robes darker, heavier with ceremonial weight. Their ears moved in a complex pattern Elias' implant struggled to decode before settling on a tentative interpretation. Emotional anomaly detected. Subject exhibits absence. Absence. Elias resisted the urge to frown. Virlia raised one slender hand. The murmurs died instantly. Pause the right, she said. The linguistic prism hesitated, then translated. The ambassador stiffened beside Elias. Your Eminence. Virlia's gaze never left Elias' face. There is interference, she replied calmly. The empathic field is disrupted. The words landed like a dropped glass. Empathic field disruption was not a thing that happened accidentally. It implied psychic intrusion, technological sabotage, or biological anomaly. All eyes, human and Aurelian alike, shifted to Elias. He remained at parade rest, hands visible, posture unthreatening. Ambassador Hale leaned toward him just enough to whisper, Lieutenant, what did you do? Elias didn't take his eyes off the Regent. Nothing, sir. That, unfortunately, was the problem. Virlia descended from the dais. The movement was unhurried, but it carried gravity. Guards along the chamber's perimeter adjusted their stance, not weapons raised, but attention sharpened. The kind of readiness that came from centuries of ritualized response. She stopped exactly 2 meters in front of Elias, close enough that he could see the subtle fractal patterns in her irises, shifting with every breath he took. Close enough that whatever she was perceiving intensified. Her expression was not cold, it was unsettled. You are not shielded, she said. Elias blinked. Your Eminence. There is no empathic dampening around you. No mental static, no trained projection, no concealment. Her ears twitched sharply, and yet, she hesitated. That alone sent another wave of murmurs through the court. And yet, she continued slowly, you are quiet. The empath attendant stepped forward again. High Regent, this contradicts established models. Humans are emotionally active but non-broadcasting. Their inner states should be chaotic at close proximity. Yes, Virlia said, they should be. Her eyes returned to Elias. But yours are not. Elias swallowed. If he was honest, he wasn't sure what she expected to find. He had emotions, plenty of them. Anxiety, restraint, responsibility, a lifelong habit of carrying other people's tension so they didn't have to. He just didn't leak. I don't know how to answer that, Elias said carefully. I'm not trained in empathic theory. Then answer plainly, Virlia replied. What are you feeling right now? Every instinct Elias had told him this was a trap. Every human diplomatic instinct screamed, do not answer honestly. So, naturally, he did. I'm trying very hard not to make things worse, he said. I'm aware that I don't belong in this space the way you do. and I don't want to disrupt something that matters to you." The silence that followed was different, not sharp, not alarmed, attentive. Viorlia's ears rose slowly, then stilled in a position Elia's implant had no label for. The empath attendant inhaled sharply. "That is impossible." "What is?" the regent asked without looking away. "There is no emotional distortion. No amplification, no masking." The attendant's voice trembled. "He is not suppressing anything, he is simply aligned." "Aligned." The word echoed uncomfortably inside Elias. Viorlia studied him for a long moment, then did something no Aurelian ruler had done in recorded diplomatic history. She smiled, just barely. "You are not empty, Lieutenant Elias Ward," she said. "You are coherent." Something in her voice softened on the word. The ambassador exhaled like a man who had narrowly avoided stepping on a mine. Viorlia straightened and turned back toward the court. "The right will resume," she announced, "but with amended context." Her gaze flicked back to Elias one last time. "Remain where you are," she added. "You appear to be stabilizing." Elias did not move. Because for the first time since arriving on Aurelian Prime, the silence around him no longer felt heavy. It felt shared. The private audience chamber was smaller than the sanctum, but it felt more exposed. Here, the walls didn't shimmer or refract light. They absorbed it. The stone was smooth, matte, almost comforting in its simplicity, as if the space had been deliberately designed to reduce sensory overload. Elias recognized the intent immediately. This room was for honesty. Viorlia stood near the center, her formal regalia replaced by a simpler mantle that clung to her frame without ceremony. Without the visual spectacle of the court, she seemed more present, less symbol, more person. Elias was escorted in by two guards who stopped at the threshold. The door sealed behind him with a soft, final sound. No weapons were drawn. That fact alone made his pulse tick up. "Lieutenant Elias Ward," Viorlia said, turning to face him fully, "you are not under accusation." "That's reassuring," Elias replied. "Usually when someone says that, it means I am." One corner of her mouth curved upward. A restrained reaction but genuine. "Humans use humor as a stabilizing mechanism," she observed. "Yes, Your Eminence. Especially when we're trying not to panic." Her ears shifted forward, then slightly down. Thoughtful. "Please," she said, gesturing to a low seating structure grown seamlessly from the stone. "Sit or stand. Whatever allows you to remain coherent." Elias chose to sit, carefully. The stone was warm, not physically but perceptually, as if it responded subtly to presence rather than temperature. Viorlia remained standing. "I have reviewed every empathic reading taken during the ceremony," she said. "They do not align with existing human profiles." "I get that a lot," Elias said, "usually from psychologists." She regarded him intently. "You do not broadcast. You do not mask. You do not fluctuate. Your emotional state maintains a steady baseline even under perceived threat." "I grew up in a loud household," Elias said after a moment. "You learn to keep things inside, not suppressed, just contained." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Contained emotions still generate internal turbulence." "Only if you fight them," Elias replied. "I don't, I just let them be." That earned him a long, unreadable look. "You realize," Viorlia said slowly, "that to my people, emotional coherence is a trained discipline achieved only after decades of empathic refinement." Elias shifted. "I'm flattered, but I didn't train for this." "That," she said quietly, "is what troubles me." She moved closer, not abruptly, not invading his space, but intentionally. With each step, Elias became aware of a subtle pressure, not oppressive but perceptive, like standing near someone who noticed everything. "My species evolved around emotional resonance," Viorlia continued. "We trust what we can feel. We fear what we cannot. Humans have always existed in that blind spot." She stopped directly in front of him. "And now you stand here," she said, "radiating a state my people associate with safety." Elias looked up at her. Their eyes met. Something passed between them, not a rush, not a spark, but a moment of alignment so clean it was almost unsettling. "I don't think I radiate anything," he said quietly. "I just don't push." Her breath caught, just slightly. "That," she said, voice lower now, "may be the most dangerous trait of all." Silence stretched between them, not awkward, intimate. Violia straightened abruptly, as if aware of the shift herself. Her ears angled back, a controlled retreat. "This changes our diplomatic framework," she said. "You will be asked to remain on Aurelian Prime as a consultant." Elias blinked. "I'm security." "You are," she agreed, "but not in the way you understand." She turned, walking toward the chamber's far wall where faint patterns pulsed like distant heartbeats. "You stabilize empathic fields without intent," she continued. "Children respond to you. Guards unconsciously adjust around you. Even I find my thoughts quieter in your presence." She looked back at him. "That is not coincidence." Elias stood slowly. "Your Eminence, if I'm causing some kind of imprinting effect, that could be dangerous." The training chamber was not a chamber in the traditional sense. It was open on all sides, suspended above a slow-moving sea of light that pulsed in gentle waves beneath a translucent floor. The Aurelians called it the resonance verge, a place where empathic currents were strongest and easiest to observe. Elias stood at the center of it, feeling profoundly underqualified. Around him sat 6 Aurelian empath scholars in a wide arc, their postures mirroring one another with ritual precision. Each wore a circlet of thin crystal filaments that glowed faintly, tuned to amplify perception. Violia stood behind them, hands folded, expression composed. "Begin," she said. The scholars closed their eyes. The air changed. Elias felt it immediately, a pressure building not on his body but around it, like standing in a current while remaining still. Emotional resonance rippled outward from the Aurelians in layered waves. Curiosity, caution, analytical focus, faint unease. His implant began to flag sensory anomalies, then quietly shut up, clearly out of its depth. Elias did nothing. He breathed. He grounded himself the same way he always had, by noticing physical reality. The feel of the floor beneath his boots, the steady rhythm of his pulse, the fact that he was here alive, not under attack. The empathic waves reached him and dissolved, not repelled, not blocked. They simply lost cohesion, like sound entering a space that absorbed echo. One of the scholars gasped. Another's ears twitched violently, breaking formation. "That's not possible," one whispered. "He should be overwhelmed." Violia's eyes narrowed, intent sharpened. "Increase projection," she ordered. The scholars obeyed. This time the emotional broadcast carried weight, fear layered with authority, curiosity edged with dominance, a subtle pressure meant to provoke response. Elias felt it wash over him. He acknowledged it and let it pass. He did not brace. He did not resist. He did not reflect it back. The verge grew still. The sea of light beneath the floor smoothed, its pulse slowing to a near standstill. Silence fell, not empty but stable. The scholars opened their eyes one by one, unsettled. "He's not null," one said. "Nulls disrupt. This is different." "He's an anchor," another murmured. "The field is organizing around him." Violia stepped forward. Her presence shifted the space immediately, not with force but with gravity. She stopped just outside Elias' reach, studying him as if seeing him anew. "Do you feel anything?" she asked quietly. Elias considered. "I feel like everyone's trying very hard," he said, "and that no one here actually wants conflict." That earned him several sharp looks. "That level of empathic inference requires training," a senior scholar said. "You should not be able to separate layered intent so cleanly." "I grew up mediating between people who didn't know how to say what they meant," Elias replied. "You get used to listening for what's underneath." Violia's ears angled forward. "And what do you hear now?" she asked. Elias hesitated. This wasn't a test anymore. It was personal. He glanced at the scholars, then back at her. "I hear tension," he said. "Not about me, about you." The room went very still. Violia did not deny it. "They fear change," Elias continued carefully. and they fear losing clarity. You're respected because you are controlled, predictable. If that shifts, my authority becomes questionable, she finished. Yes. The scholars stiffened, some ears flattening in discomfort. Violia held their gaze. Leave us, she said. There was a beat of hesitation, then obedience. The scholars rose, filed out in silence, their glances toward Elias a mix of unease and reluctant awe. When they were alone, the verge felt different, less structured, more real. You speak truth too easily, Violia said. Elias shrugged. It's easier than pretending. She turned away from him, looking out over the glowing expanse below. For my people, emotional transparency is power, she said. And yet, around you, I find myself less guarded. Her fingers curled slightly at her side. That is not comfortable. I'm not trying to disarm you, Elias said softly. I just don't see a reason to hold a weapon when no one's attacking. She laughed. The sound surprised both of them. It was quieter than court laughter, less polished, real. That is exactly the problem, she said, turning back to him. The training chamber was not a chamber in the traditional sense. It was open on all sides, suspended above a slow-moving sea of light that pulsed in gentle waves beneath a translucent floor. The Aurelians called it the resonance verge, a place where empathic currents were strongest and easiest to observe. Elias stood at the center of it, feeling profoundly underqualified. Around him sat 6 Aurelian empath scholars in a wide arc, their postures mirroring one another with ritual precision. Each wore a circlet of thin crystal filaments that glowed faintly, tuned to amplify perception. Violia stood behind them, hands folded, expression composed. Begin, she said. The scholars closed their eyes. The air changed. Elias felt it immediately, a pressure building not on his body but around it, like standing in a current while remaining still. Emotional resonance rippled outward from the Aurelians in layered waves. Curiosity, caution, analytical focus, faint unease. His implant began to flag sensory anomalies, then quietly shut up, clearly out of its depth. Elias did nothing. He breathed. He grounded himself the same way he always had, by noticing physical reality. The feel of the floor beneath his boots, the steady rhythm of his pulse, the fact that he was here alive, not under attack. The empathic waves reached him and dissolved, not repelled, not blocked. They simply lost cohesion, like sound entering a space that absorbed echo. One of the scholars gasped. Another's ears twitched violently, breaking formation. That's not possible, one whispered. He should be overwhelmed. Violia's eyes narrowed, intent sharpened. Increase projection, she ordered. The scholars obeyed. This time the emotional broadcast carried weight, fear layered with authority, curiosity edged with dominance. A subtle pressure meant to provoke response. Elias felt it wash over him. He acknowledged it and let it pass. He did not brace. He did not resist. He did not reflect it back. The verge grew still. The sea of light beneath the floor smoothed, its pulse slowing to a near standstill. Silence fell, not empty but stable. The scholars opened their eyes one by one, unsettled. He's not null, one said. Nulls disrupt. This is different. He's an anchor, another murmured. The field is organizing around him. Violia stepped forward. Her presence shifted the space immediately, not with force but with gravity. She stopped just outside Elias' reach, studying him as if seeing him anew. Do you feel anything? She asked quietly. Elias considered. I feel like everyone's trying very hard, he said, and that no one here actually wants conflict. That earned him several sharp looks. That level of empathic inference requires training, a senior scholar said. You should not be able to separate layered intent so cleanly. I grew up mediating between people who didn't know how to say what they meant, Elias replied. You get used to listening for what's underneath. Violia's ears angled forward. And what do you hear now? She asked. Elias hesitated. This wasn't a test anymore. It was personal. He glanced at the scholars, then back at her. I hear tension, he said. Not about me, about you. The room went very still. Virelia did not deny it. They fear change, Elias continued carefully. And they fear losing clarity. You're respected because you are controlled, predictable. If that shifts, my authority becomes questionable, she finished. Yes. The scholars stiffened, some ears flattening in discomfort. Virelia held their gaze. Leave us, she said. There was a beat of hesitation, then obedience. The scholars rose, filed out in silence, their glances toward Elias a mix of unease and reluctant awe. When they were alone, the verge felt different, less structured, more real. You speak truth too easily, Virelia said. Elias shrugged. It's easier than pretending. She turned away from him, looking out over the glowing expanse below. For my people, emotional transparency is power, she said. And yet, around you, I find myself less guarded. Her fingers curled slightly at her side. That is not comfortable. I'm not trying to disarm you, Elias said softly. I just don't see a reason to hold a weapon when no one's attacking. She laughed. The sound surprised both of them. It was quieter than court laughter, less polished, real. That is exactly the problem, she said, turning back to him. The fallout did not come loudly. It arrived in controlled whispers, redirected schedules, and invitations that were technically optional and politically unavoidable. Elias noticed it first in the way guards adjusted their patrol routes, subtly favoring positions closer to him. Then in the way junior aides lingered a second too long when he passed, their ears flicking with barely restrained curiosity. And finally, unmistakably, in the way High Regent Virelia was no longer alone when she met with the conquered council. They were watching her, and by extension they were watching him. The council chamber was narrower than the sanctum, built to encourage proximity and pressure. Aurelians preferred close quarters for political debate. It amplified empathic feedback, making deception uncomfortable. Elias stood at Virelia's right this time, not behind. That shift alone sent a ripple through the assembled nobles. Human presence during internal deliberation is irregular, one counselor said, ears angled sharply back. This body was assured the Terran liaison was temporary. He remains temporary, Virelia replied calmly, as all things are. Elias kept his expression neutral, though inwardly he noted the phrasing. Not this arrangement. Not his role, all things. Another counselor leaned forward. His presence alters empathic coherence. That alone warrants concern. Yes, Virelia agreed, which is why understanding it is essential. The counselor's eyes flicked to Elias. Or containing it. That did it. The pressure in the room shifted, not overt hostility but a tightening, a subtle attempt to provoke response. Elias felt it, and for the first time since arriving on Aurelian Prime, something inside him stirred. Not anger, resolve. I'm not here to replace anything, he said quietly. The council stilled. Virelia did not interrupt him. I don't have the capacity to manipulate your empathic systems, Elias continued. I don't broadcast. I don't influence, I exist. He met the counselor's gaze. If that destabilizes your structures, the instability was already there. A sharp inhale moved through the chamber. That was not diplomatic language. That was truth. Virelia's ears tilted, half approval, half warning. Enough, she said. This council will not mistake introspection for threat. The meeting ended shortly after. Consensus postponed under the guise of further study. As they exited into a side corridor washed in dim blue light, Virelia's composure finally cracked, just a little. You should not have spoken, she said, not unkindly. I know, Elias replied, but they were going to push. Yes, she said, and you pushed back without force. She stopped walking, so did he. For a moment neither spoke. Then she exhaled slowly. I am expected to be unshakable, she said, emotionally precise, balanced. The conquered trusts me because I feel correctly. And now, Elias asked. And now, she said quietly, I feel things that are not pre-approved. She turned to face him fully. Her eyes were unguarded. I am not frightened of you, she said. I am frightened of what becomes possible around you. Elias searched her face, seeing not a regent now, but a woman carrying the weight of an entire species' expectations. You don't have to become something else, he said. You just have to allow more room. Her lips parted as if to respond, then she stopped herself. Too close, too personal. She stepped back, control reasserting itself with visible effort. This cannot continue unchecked, she said. Perception matters. So does honesty, Elias replied. Yes, she said softly, and those two rarely coexist peacefully. That night, Elias lay awake in his assigned quarters, staring at a ceiling that gently glowed in response to his breathing. He replayed the day in fragments, the council's tension, Viorlia's expression when she admitted fear, the way the empathic field settled when he was near her. He wasn't trying to change her, but something was changing anyway. And deep within the palace, High Regent Viorlia stood alone on a balcony overlooking the luminous seas of Aurelian Prime, hands gripping the rail. For the first time in her life, her thoughts were not loud. They were clear. And the attempt came quietly. No alarms, no weapons drawn, no dramatic declarations of treason. Just a recalibration order buried 3 levels deep in the palace's operational lattice. Elias noticed because things stopped lining up. The ambient hum of the corridors shifted half a tone. The guards at the eastern access wing rotated positions out of sequence. And the empathic background, normally a low, ever-present wash, felt strained, stretched too thin, like a signal pushed beyond safe limits. He paused mid-corridor. That same internal stillness he'd been relying on since his arrival settled into place. But this time it sharpened. Something was wrong. His implant finally earned its processing power, flagging a subtle anomaly. Localized empathic amplification detected. Unauthorized. That wasn't a research adjustment. That was a provocation. Elias changed direction without announcing it, moving toward the resonance verge. If someone wanted to destabilize the empathic field, that was where they'd do the most damage, with plausible deniability. He arrived just in time to see Viorlia. She stood at the center of the verge, alone. The sea of light beneath the translucent floor churned violently now, waves colliding in chaotic interference patterns. Empathic pressure radiated outward in sharp pulses. Fear, doubt, anger, urgency. Too many signals overlapping without coherence. Viorlia's posture was rigid. Her ears were pulled tight against her head, her hands clenched at her sides. She was holding it together by sheer discipline. "Don't come closer," she said without turning. Her voice carried strain she hadn't allowed anyone else to hear. "They're amplifying the field," Elias replied, trying to force an emotional break. "They believe," she said tightly, "that if I destabilize publicly, the conquered will demand containment. Of me, of you." That explained the subtlety. No coup, just pressure until she cracked. Elias stepped onto the verge. The empathic surge hit him immediately. It should have overwhelmed him. Instead, it found resistance. Not a wall, an anchor. The chaotic waves met the stillness around Elias and began, slowly, unwillingly, to reorganize. Viorlia gasped. Her head snapped toward him. "You shouldn't be able to do that," she said. "I'm not doing anything," Elias replied. "I'm just here." He moved to stand beside her. The pressure eased, not vanished, but balanced. The sea of light below began to smooth, its violent surges slowing into longer, steadier pulses. Viorlia's breathing stuttered, then steadied. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked human, not weaker, unarmored. "They're watching," she said quietly. "Every deviation, every emotional fluctuation." Elias met her gaze. "Then let them watch you not break." Her eyes searched his and something decisive settled there. She straightened, not away from him, but with him. "I am High Regent of the Aurelian Conquered," she said, voice resonating outward, amplified now by choice rather than force. "And I will not be destabilized by fear disguised as caution." The empathic field snapped into alignment, not suppressed, directed. Observers across the palace felt it, the sudden clarity, the absence of noise. The attempted manipulation collapsed under its own imbalance. Moments later, Aides and guards flooded the verge, stopping short when they saw the two of them standing together at the center. Calm, unshaken. One of the senior counselors arrived, ears stiff with restrained alarm. Eminence, the amplification lattice failed. Yes, Violia said, it did. Her gaze did not leave Ilia's. Because you tried to force emotion, she continued, and forgot that control is not the same as stability. The counselor's ears flattened. I will address the conquered, Violia said, immediately. The chamber cleared as quickly as it had filled. When they were alone again, the verge was quiet, truly quiet now. Violia exhaled, long and unsteady. You chose, she said. You could have stayed out of this. So could you, Elias replied. She turned toward him fully. And yet we didn't. The space between them felt charged, not with chaos, but with something far more dangerous. Trust. The conquered chamber had never felt so unstable. Not because of raised voices or overt conflict, but because the empathic current that usually flowed in predictable patterns now moved with unfamiliar clarity. The nobles sensed it immediately. Something fundamental had shifted, and it had not been authorized by tradition. High Regent Violia stood alone at the center. Elias remained at the perimeter, exactly where protocol insisted he should be, visible, present, and impossible to ignore. The attempted amplification was unauthorized, Violia said, her voice carrying evenly through the chamber. It was designed to provoke emotional fracture under the guise of caution. Several ears flattened, others twitched with discomfort. That is a grave accusation, one elder replied. It is a factual one, Violia said calmly. The data has already been verified. Silence followed, not because of fear, but because the empathic field refused to support denial. The truth, once named, had nowhere to hide. And yet, another counselor said carefully, the presence of the human remains a variable we did not consent to. Violia inclined her head. That is correct, you did not. She paused, I did. The chamber reacted instantly, gasps, sharp emotional flares, a surge of disbelief. You risk destabilizing centuries of empathic cohesion, the elder said. No, Violia replied. I risk evolving it. Her ears shifted into a position Elias had come to recognize. Not dominance, not submission, but resolve. For generations, we believed humans were emotionally unreadable because they lacked depth. We were wrong. They communicate stability, not spectacle. Intention, not broadcast. She turned, her gaze sweeping the chamber. Our children sensed this first, as they always do. That landed. No Aurelian dismissed the instincts of children lightly. Violia gestured subtly toward Elias. He does not amplify. He does not manipulate. He does not dominate. And yet, in his presence, our empathic fields stabilize rather than fracture. She let that truth settle. This is not contamination, she said. It is complementarity. The chamber did not erupt into agreement, but it did not reject her either. Afterward, when the council dispersed in tight clusters of whispered recalculations, Elias found Violia waiting for him in the quiet corridor beyond. You have just made yourself a target, he said gently. She smiled, small, tired, real. I already was. They walked in silence for a while, the palace's soft light adjusting to their pace. I did not plan to say that, she admitted. About consent, about choosing. You meant it, Elias said. Yes, she replied, and that may be worse. She stopped near a wide opening that looked out over the luminous seas. The light reflected in her eyes, softer now, less guarded. I am not accustomed to uncertainty, she said, nor to wanting things that are not defined. Elias leaned against the railing beside her, leaving space. I don't think what's happening needs a name, he said. Not yet. Her ears flicked, considering. You are very dangerous, she said quietly. He smiled faintly. I've been told. She turned toward him then fully. Stay, she said, not as an order, not as a request, as something closer to honesty. Elias met her gaze. I wasn't planning on leaving, he said. The empathic field around them settled. No surge, no flare, just alignment. Chapter 8. The announcement came 3 days later, not dramatic, not ceremonial, just a quiet addition to the Concord's public record. Human, Aurelian Empathic Exchange Program, approved. Elias read it twice to be sure. You've officially become a framework, Ambassador Hale said dryly. Congratulations. Most people just become footnotes. Elias exhaled. I don't feel qualified. That makes you perfect, Hale replied. If you ever start feeling qualified, I'll worry. Later that evening, Elias found himself once again at the resonance verge. Violia stood there, watching the sea of light move in slow, steady rhythms. No guards nearby, no observers, just openness. They are afraid, she said without turning. Some still believe this will unravel us. Change usually feels like that, Elias replied. She nodded. I will not ask you to be something you are not, she said, nor to carry responsibility that should be mine. He joined her at the edge. Good, he said, because I'm not interested in fixing anyone. She smiled at that. Then what are you interested in? She asked. Elias considered. In being present, he said. In listening, in not turning away when things get complicated. Violia turned toward him, her expression open in a way it had never been before. That, she said softly, is more than enough. They stood together as the verge pulsed gently beneath their feet, human stillness and Aurelian resonance finding a shared rhythm. Not merged, not consumed, aligned.